Today we're going to look at a proof where our given information is that the measure of segment RS minus the measure of segment TV equals 5, the measure of segment XY minus the measure of segment TV equals 5, and we're going to prove that segment RS is congruent to segment XY. So as with all of our proofs, we're going to start with our givens. And so my first statement is the measure of segment RS minus the measure of segment TV equals 5. And we know that because that information was given to us. Our second statement, we have a second piece of given information, and that's the measure of segment XY minus the measure of segment TV equals 5, and again that information was given to us. So going back to our three key questions we've discussed in class, our first key question is anything the same? And so as I look at my two statements, I see that there's a measure of segment TV in both statements. However, it also has, with those, it has other pieces of information on that side of the equal sign with it. So it's not really alone. But if I look at the other side of my equations, both of them are equal to 5. And so what I can do is, because both of these statements, RS minus TV and XY minus TV, since they both equal 5, we know that these statements are the same. And so what I can do is, in place of 5, I can put one of the statements. So I can actually set them equal to each other. So my third statement is that the measure of segment RS minus the measure of segment TV equals the measure of segment XY minus the measure of segment TV. And the reason I know that is because I replaced the 5 with this expression. I've actually substituted, so that was actually step 3. So I've actually substituted this expression in place of 5. So that is substitution. And I used steps 1 and 2. I'm going to cross those off because I've used those. Going back to my key questions, is anything the same? And so there's only one statement, so I can't do any substituting. I don't have any keywords. For question 2, is there a keyword? In question 3, I have no diagram, so I can't conclude anything from it. And so if I look at what I'm trying to prove, I'm trying to show that segment RS is congruent to segment XY. Well, going back to this idea that both sides had a measure of segment TV, what I can do is I can get rid of those. So since they're being subtracted, to undo subtraction, I can add TV to both sides, and that would cancel those out. And so that would leave me with, on the left-hand side, the measure of segment RS equaling the measure of segment XY. And again, I've added TV to both sides, and so that's the addition property of equality. And I added to step 3. And again, I'm going to cross that off. Now, my fourth step looks very similar to what I'm trying to prove, and so I know that the measures of these two segments are the same. And so I can make a conclusion that segments RS and segment XY are congruent because of the definition of congruent segments, which says that if two segments have the same measure, they are going to be congruent figures.